Hey, welcome to another episode of Captain's Log. This week, I'd like to talk about what would have Star Trek have been like if certain other things had happened. For instance, what if uh, the Cage, the original pilot, had been made into a series? How would Star Trek have differed? I just want to list some of the possible projects that had been in development in Star Trek all the way back to the original series. So one thing I would like to mention is the sequel to the last Next Generation film, Nemesis. It would have been a crossover from what I was find that involved Picard, Data, Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, Captain Archer. The basic storyline had been that what if Picard had gone back in time to get the others that I mentioned, Data, Kirk, Spock, and Archer, to fight a threat to the Federation in his time. Also, it would have been the threat would have been from such people as Khan and Shinzon, some of the greatest Star Trek villains of all time. And from what I was able to find out, the storyline was such that Picard was the only one who had any idea of how to battle the threat posed by these villains. But what killed the idea was the failure that Nemesis was in the box office. Personally, I found Nemesis myself to be a little boring, and it seemed like it was just plodding along at times. Now, don't get me wrong, there was points I absolutely loved. The fact that Shinzon himself was a clone of Jean-Luc, and but he ended up with some of the disease that almost crippled Jean-Luc in his earlier life, which kind of makes me wonder why they couldn't have maybe fixed it. But then again, considering Shinzon grew up under Romulan rule and he was an alien earther and stuff, I'm not surprised that they wouldn't have bothered trying to fix whatever genetic problems he had. Now, another project that never made it basically past the script writing stage was a Star Trek film that has been labeled The Avengers, as in Marvel Comics Avengers. It would have been similar to the sequel to Nemesis that I just mentioned, but it would have had Picard, Odo, Data, and even the holographic doctor from Voyager. All right, now, did you know that during the second season of the original series, a spin-off series called Hope Ship had been proposed, which would have been about a Federation hospital ship featuring Dr. M'Benga from the original series. And even though it never happened, which it would have been interesting to see, to see how Federation doctors solved problems and such, and, gone to, say, different planets to solve whatever medical crisis there had been. And, but even though it would have been interesting to see that, one of the authors of the idea, Darlene Hartman, actually wrote that idea into a novel in 1994 called These Are the Voyages, TOS Season 2, which makes me want to go find it and get it and read it. It sounds interesting to me. Another idea of Star Trek was Walter Koenig himself said that had been a spin-off series featuring of all people Harry Mudd, and that had been considered, but it never got off the ground. And it would have starred the guy who played Harry Mudd, Roger Carmel, And come to find out, Carmel himself didn't even know about it until he was at a party with Gene Roddenberry, and Gene had mentioned something about, yeah, it's too bad that the Mud series never happened. And Carmel was going to say, what? Huh? What are you talking about? Carmel had, once he found out, had actually been all for the idea. He would have had a great amount of fun. And I think we all would have seen a series starring Harry Mudd. And I'm sure there would have been crossover episodes and uh, other things that would have kept it in the Star Trek universe, so to speak. But here's another show that would have been fun. Another idea to show. After the original series was canceled, there had even been the idea batted around that having a series involving just centered around Spock himself. And that would have been interesting, although I don't know how many series or seasons rather it would have actually ended up being, but it would have been interesting to see and find out more about Spock himself. Now, here's a series that, while it never happened, it kind of sort of did. Those of us who've been Star Trek fans for a while know about the uh, failed idea of Star Trek Phase 2. It had been proposed as a sequel as early as 1977. But due to one problem or another, it never quite finished developing, although it had made a lot of strides towards being a regular series. And so, but then the idea of making Star Trek the Motion Picture came along, and they actually ended up using a lot of the sets from Phase 2 and a lot of the characters and a lot of the actors to help save money. And who knows what Star Trek would have been like if Phase 2 had actually made it. And also, I learned that there was a number of scripts that had been developed for the first season of Phase 2 alone. And a few of them, like Katumba and a number of others, actually made it as or readapted or adapted rather for the fan series of Star Trek New Voyages. And you ought to check it out. That series, New Voyages, on the internet, it's actually a pretty decent one. And I wish they could have gone longer, but it was pretty good. I love the way they did their homework and the exactness of the sets. But even so, it would have been interesting to find out if the Phase 2 series, what it would have been like afterwards. Also, another idea that never really made it off the drawing board was a Star Trek series involving the Academy. It would have been Starfleet Academy. Basically, it would have been cadets learning how to fly a starship, and they would have been using the Enterprise, and it would have been commanded by a Vulcan. Gee, does that sound familiar? As in Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, especially the opening sequence with Savick in charge of a group of cadets running through the Kobayashi Maru scenario. That would have been interesting. So yeah, even though some of the ideas never made it alone by themselves, they were still being used for later projects. And here's one that I found really interesting, and it would have been funny, was a sitcom Star Trek series starring none other than Lwaxana Troi. That would have been fun. I always enjoyed the times when she appeared on the Star Trek series, especially in Next Generation, when they actually seemed Picard was actually afraid of her, or, and stuff. And she just played that up. That was so much fun seeing those. Now, it had also been said that Majel Barrett had actually was behind this project, well, to some extent, but she wasn't the originator, but she was in support of it. And she said she would have had a lot of fun doing it. That I agree. That would have been a lot of fun. Now, Now, while not exactly a series that never made it off the drawing board, there was actually a 5th season of Enterprise being considered, and a lot of ideas were going around about how it would have, what it would have been like and stuff. The prevailing idea that I've heard mostly is the fact that it would have been the 5th season of Enterprise would have been centered around the Romulan War and what that was like. So that would have been fun. That would have been interesting, and in my opinion, enjoyable if it had been done right. Unfortunately, it never happened. There were various reasons and things like that, and so even so, I would have loved to have seen it. It would have been, given more of a backstory to Star Trek and the events between, Archer's Enterprise and Pike or Kirk's Enterprise. What would some of the stuff that would have happened in between, and again, here's another one that wasn't quite. Well, yeah, it was a series. If those of us who were fans of the original series and Star Trek fans in general remember the episode called Assignment Earth, where Gary Seven, human whose ancestors had been taken in and trained by an alien species with the idea being that he would have come back to Earth, which he did in the episode, and would have gone around Earth, interfering, if you will, obviously no prime directive, in Earth's development and shaping it into a better society. And where the idea would have been for the betterment of all mankind, but that would have been fun. And it wasn't just Gary Seven, Roberta Lincoln, and Gary's cat, Isis. There was a whole team of people, a whole group of people, organization even, on Earth, as evidenced by Gary trying to find supervisors and finding out that they had been killed in a car crash, of all things. That was an idea that I would have liked to have seen. Now, it didn't entirely die out, the Assignment Earth idea, because Gene Roddenberry came back later on and made a TV movie called The Questor Tapes, which I happen to have a copy of. And I noticed a couple of the actors from Star Trek itself made it into the Questor Tapes. I think Chekhov, Walter Koenig was one of them, although it was kind of weird seeing him in the hairdo that he had. But that, Questor Tapes was this android who was going around Earth trying to guide it into a better future. And so now, there were also a number of animated series that had been proposed. And before the Star Trek, the animated series that actually made it onto the TV screen, another Star Trek animated series had been proposed where it would have been basically the crew of the Enterprise running around to different planets, beaming down, landing, whatever have you, and shooting everything else in sight, kind of like shoot first, ask questions later, sort of like Han Solo of Star Trek, if you will. I'm kind of glad that never happened, because that would not have been in keeping with the Star Trek philosophy of, mankind developing into a better version of itself. Going around shooting people first and asking questions later is not the way to do it, in my opinion. And then that was, I think, since it was proposed before the animated series, it would have been like a very early 70s when that idea came around. Now, in 1990, another animated series involving both the original series and Next Generation crew had been proposed, but I didn't find out too much about it. But I did find out that according to Rick Berman, he making that show would have been diluting the franchise, whatever that means. Possibly, it would have weakened the idea, and maybe Star Trek might have died out before we have what we have today. Also, in the late 90s, now this one would have been interesting, was Paramount had considered producing a Star Trek series based on CGI animation, and that would have been fun. I'm assuming it would have been, and it was based on the original series, so it would have been Kirk and crew in animated version going around and solving problems the Star Trek style. And I would have hoped it would have featured most of, or a good portion of, the original actors on the show, but still, that would have been interesting to see. Now, in 2001, Armin Shimmerman, of all people, but of course, had developed an idea where a Star Trek series based on the Ferengi. What else? And it also would have been on MTV, of all places, but perfect. But MTV apparently turned it down because they didn't want a space cartoon show. And considering how some of the shows that MTV had on there, personally, I think a show about the Ferengis would have improved it, because I'm old enough to remember when MTV was MTV. In other words, music television, not some music and some series, because look what we got. Beavis and Butthead, for one thing. Don't get me started on that one. But now, along with another animated series, was also a CGI series, but it would have had the crew in the Wrath of Khan uniforms, the film era uniforms, the Monster Maroons also. But and the idea would have been that Captain Sulu had taken over the Enterprise B from John Harriman. How that would have happened, I don't know. Or maybe he got command of it instead of Captain Harriman. Now, that he would have taken the Enterprise B and gone around fighting off an invasion by the Kzinti. If you remember those, they were the cat creatures from the original animated series that did make it. And they were featured in the episode of that series called The Slaver Weapon. I would have loved to have seen that. And of course, I would have loved to have seen all of these if they had been made, except, of course, that one combining the next gen crew and the original crew. I'm going, no, that would have been too hard to explain time-wise and stuff. Now, speaking of time, there had actually been a series, Star Trek series involving the Kelvin Universe crew. And that would have been interesting to see how maybe would they have taken some of the ideas that are stories in the original series and given them a different twist. Like they did one, I forget which movie it was. I think it might have been the first one or the second one, where they mentioned using, I'm talking about the Kelvin Star Trek, where they mentioned the mud incident. And, they even show Harry Mudd's ship, and they were using it in that movie. But considering how it almost made it, Star Trek in 2009, the first reboot movie, it did okay at the box office. But again, Hollywood is driven by the almighty dollar. And while the first reboot movie did okay. It didn't do well enough for them to even consider bringing on another TV series. So if I'm just bringing this up, all these different ideas up, because if people think there's too much Star Trek on now, think of what the possibility might have been if any or all of these ideas that I've listed here this week would have happened, what we would have had, how different the Star Trek franchise would have been if all of these series had made it to the screen. So, and that's all I want to talk about today about my what if. I was kind of inspired by the Disney Plus series, Marvel series of What If. I started thinking about that and how can I put it into Star Trek terms, and this is what I came up with. So if you guys have any comments about this idea or any of these that I offered you today, please do so in the comments below. And
program complete. Enter when ready.
all right, this subject that I want to talk about right now is one that I'm very excited about. It's the fact that last week, Sunday, the second episode, well, actually the third episode of the Lexington Adventures was premiered on No Budget and Filk Fair Productions YouTube channel. I will provide the link below if you want to watch it. It was my second outing as Captain Alexander McKnight of the Lexington A. It was called After Action, the idea being that after every military operation, the people, the leadership involved must debrief or give an explanation of the event. So, after the action happened, hence the title After Action. It was fun for me to reappear as Captain McKnight and interact with my on-screen old friend of Eric Menard, played by Vance Major of No Budget Productions. And it was a lot of fun. And it was filmed, my scenes were filmed in one day. I'm wearing a Monster Maroon uniform that is my own. I have the complete uniform here at home. And just to give you a little background on some of the happenings that you see or didn't see, was the fact that Vance kept messing up the Admiral Two Rivers name, and no, that was Two Wolves. See, I messed it up, but he kept messing up my so-called nemesis, or my my thorn in my side from the academy days. He kept messing up the name. And another thing about it is that the pizza rolls that we were consuming, if you will, so to speak, in the film were not cooked at all. So I had to pretend to chew on a frozen pizza roll. That is not the most fun thing to do. But again, I'm excited about it. I love playing Captain McKnight. I look forward to doing it again. There are a number of scripts in development involving more episodes of the Lexington Adventures. But as I said, this was the third episode in the Lexington Adventures, the first being The Rise of the Tribbles, the second being Bellum Eternus, and the third one being After Action. And so if you get a chance, watch it. And if you PM me, I will gladly provide you with the link, or you can find it in the comments below. All in all, it was fun to do, and I look forward to doing some more of it.
Program complete. Enter when ready.
Okay, that's it for this week. Once again, thank you for watching, and may the great bird of the galaxy bless your planet.